we have created an industry that is unable to surge because it lives on such tight margins based on budgeting and how budgeting comes down from the government. No one is building extra capacity because that capacity costs money. And we would not be able to surge to build tanks, mortars, howitzers, aircraft, certainly, ships for sure. There's no surge capability out there, and that's something we need to strategically think about.
I want to ask you a bit about equipment today, because the British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has said that the Ukraine war had exposed a shortage of ammunition supplies in the military, supplies on the scale that would be needed to fight a serious offensive war against an enemy such as Russia. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think lots of militaries are making this discovery. If you think about how budgets have run for the last 2 decades, we do everything on the minimums, and we plan on just-in-time logistics to replace issues. And we've never had to really think about fighting the big war where we're consuming ammunition and weapons at a rate like the Ukrainians are now. And so even though, and I'm thankful for what our nations are doing, but even though we're resupplying Ukraine and doing it at probably not an appropriate rate even yet to keep them in the war the right way, we are finding that they are putting strains on things even in our supply systems.
It's an extraordinary moment of revelation, isn't it? If it ever came to a major land engagement between the West, Europe, NATO, and Russia, and heaven forbid that came to be the case, from what we've learned from Ukraine, it would be as if they'd be fighting for a matter of days, and then everyone would run out. Now, that may be in some strange way a good thing, but as if the military on both sides would end up very quickly throwing rocks at each other, or at least something very much worse than rocks.
Well, we would certainly run fairly quickly out of the precision strike capabilities. And that's what we've seen with the Russians already. They have made some decisions, I'm sure, to hold a few back in case they had a dust up somewhere else. But they have rapidly gotten out of the precise strike capabilities. And that's a big reason why they've really resorted to this sort of indiscriminate criminal bombing and shelling that truly only takes the war to the population of Ukraine.
Yes.
Yes. So military of Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, as the Defence Secretary, the British Defence Secretary, analysed it, there'd been a tendency to construct military forces, armies, Marines, military units that look good at the front, but lack the important capacity to resupply. In other words, superficially impressive, which is obviously a failure of many different kinds, isn't it? A failure of procurement, a failure of planning. Whose failure are we talking about here?
In fact, we were really surprised. You know that when Russia was further into Ukraine, and when they were trying to take Kyiv, and they failed because of things like supply lines, and when they reconsolidated and moved to the Donbass, they're operating now very close to their national borders. And that shortens and decomplicates or uncomplicates the supply issue. And they still can't get it right. They're still suffering from this. So, you know, there's an old saying that amateurs talk operations and professionals talk logistics. That's really playing out in spades in this war.
There needs then to be a correction, doesn't there? Because while you hear political leaders and others, military experts, talking about the war in Ukraine, perhaps enduring for a very long time to come, maybe years, that is a challenge to Ukraine's allies in Europe and in the West. It's a big commitment, a long-lasting commitment, and a very expensive commitment.
It is. And if we're going to keep this up, we're going to have to resupply ourselves. In fact, the last huge tranche of money in America that was talked about being for Ukraine, a good amount of it was to move things to Ukraine, but a chunk of that money was to reconstitute the supplies that we had sent them out of our U.S. stocks and reconstitute our own stocks. And so this becomes a factor. And the lesson we need to take away from this is we have created an industry that is unable to surge because it lives on such tight margins based on budgeting and how budgeting comes down from the government. No one is building extra capacity because that capacity costs money. And we would not be able to surge to build tanks, mortars, howitzers, aircraft, certainly, ships for sure. There's no surge capability out there, and that's something we need to strategically think about.
And do you see signs that Western political leaders are absorbing that lesson?
Well, they're finding out that sometimes when they say, why can't you do this? And the answer is because industry can't react that fast. I'm not going to point to the country or the industry, but an example the other day, we asked a certain industry how fast they could spin up their line, and they said 2026.
Okay.
You know, this is not going to be what we need if we have to surge to war. We've really got to look at this in a strategic sense.
Okay. General Philip Breedlove, good of you to join us in the briefing room today.